The night my house burned down, my mother smiled and said, "Finally, karma came." She didn't scream. She didn't rush toward me. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She laughed, softly at first, like she had just been proven right about something she had waited years to say out loud. That sound stayed with me longer than the fire itself. If you're listening to this story right now, take a moment and tell me where you're listening from. Because what happened to me that night didn't just destroy a house. It exposed a truth about family that still echoes no matter where you are in the world. My name is Emily Carter. I was 32 years old, living in Durham, North Carolina, and that house was the first thing I had ever owned that didn't come with strings attached. I had worked for it quietly, patiently, without help. 4 years of saving, missed vacations, cheap groceries, late nights. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, it felt like proof that I was safe. That illusion lasted exactly 9 minutes. I had just walked in from work. My heels were off. My laptop bag was on the chair. I was pouring a glass of water when the alarm went off. Not a chirp, not a warning. A full, violent scream of sound that made my chest tighten before my brain could even process what was happening. At first, I didn't smell smoke. I felt heat. A wall of it, pressing forward from the hallway like something alive. The paint near the ceiling began to blister. The air turned thick, oily, impossible to breathe. I dropped the glass. It shattered, but I barely heard it. Run. That command didn't come from fear. It came from instinct. I didn't grab my phone. I didn't grab my laptop. I didn't grab the framed photo on the shelf. I ran barefoot out the front door, my skin stinging as the heat chased me down the driveway. Behind me, a window exploded with a sound like a gunshot. Shards of glass sprayed across the lawn I had mowed 2 days earlier. By the time I reached the street, my house was already dying. Flames rolled through the living room, where I had eaten dinner alone most nights. Smoke poured into the sky. Sirens wailed in the distance, but I knew they wouldn't make it in time. I stood there shaking, wrapped in an oversized t-shirt, my feet numb against the cold asphalt, trying to breathe without choking. That was when the Carter family arrived. A silver SUV screeched to a stop 3 houses down. I recognized it instantly. My father's car. Robert Carter stepped out first, arms already crossed, his face tight with irritation rather than concern. My sister Melissa followed, phone in hand, already typing. My younger brother Jason jumped out with both hands on his camera, adjusting the angle before he even looked at me. My mother, Linda Carter, came last. She was wearing a beige coat that probably cost more than my deductible. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup untouched. She lifted her phone immediately, not to call for help, but to film. "Oh my God," Jason said, zooming in on the flames. "This is insane. The color is unreal." I tried to speak. My throat burned. "Jason," I croaked. He didn't look at me. My father shook his head. "I told you this place was a dump," he said loudly, as if lecturing me over dinner instead of watching my home collapse. "You always bring bad luck into things." "It's my house," I whispered. "I bought it." "Not anymore," he replied flatly. Melissa stepped closer, angling herself so the fire lit her face just right. She raised her phone for a photo. I waited for her to put an arm around me. She didn't. She snapped the picture, checked it, and smiled. "The lighting is actually amazing," she said. "Don't move." And then my mother laughed, not nervously, not in shock. She laughed the way someone does when a long argument finally ends. She looked at the flames, then at me, and said, "Finally, karma came." I stood there barefoot, watching my life burn, and realized something far worse than losing a house. Not one of them had asked if I was okay. And in that moment, something inside me broke that would never be repaired. I left without saying goodbye. There was no confrontation, no final speech, no demand for decency. I slid into the back seat of a rideshare and gave the driver an address that wasn't home, wasn't family, just somewhere far enough that the night could end. As the car pulled away, I watched my family shrink in the rearview mirror, their faces lit orange by the fire, still filming, still talking, still smiling as if this were a premiere they had dressed for. I understood then that I wasn't the person who needed rescuing. I was the background they needed to perform. The motel room smelled like bleach and damp carpet. The bedspread was stiff, the light flickered, and the air hummed with an old air conditioner that never quite cooled the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same shirt, my hair sticky with smoke, my skin aching in places I hadn't noticed yet. I waited for my phone to vibrate with concern, with panic, with guilt. It didn't. Morning came quietly, and with it a different kind of hurt. Not the smell that clung to my clothes, not the ash under my fingernails, but the silence where care should have been. The first message arrived just after 8. It wasn't, "Are you safe?" It wasn't, "Where are you?" It was my father asking if I could log into the insurance portal because he couldn't remember the password. 10 minutes later, my mother wanted me to review a sponsorship email and make sure the language was clean. My sister followed with a spreadsheet attachment and a request to smooth out the numbers before she sent it to a client. My brother ended the chain by asking how quickly I could calculate fees if he sold an asset that afternoon. They spoke to me as if the night had been inconvenient but forgettable, as if the only emergency that mattered was the one they were having right now. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. It wasn't that they needed help, it was that they assumed it. They assumed my availability, my competence, my silence. They assumed I would fix things because I always had. That assumption dragged me backward through years I had neatly filed away. I remembered my father dropping a box of receipts on my kitchen table every spring, telling me I was good with numbers, then leaving before dinner while I stayed up correcting his mistakes. I remembered my mother handing me contracts she hadn't read, trusting me to catch the clauses that could cost her thousands, then thanking the universe online for her intuition. I remembered sitting on my sister's couch at midnight, rebuilding budgets she had blown through because presentation mattered more than math. I remembered my brother calling with emergencies that were never emergencies, only consequences delayed long enough for me to absorb them. I was respected at work. When I spoke, people listened. When I flagged a risk, teams adjusted. But at home, my expertise became utility. I wasn't praised or protected. I was expected. I was the quiet mechanism that kept everything running while everyone else took credit for the motion. The motel room felt smaller as the realization settled. I wasn't the daughter they worried about. I was the system they leaned on, and systems aren't loved. Systems are used until they fail, then blamed for the collapse. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Trauma makes everything louder, grief exaggerates patterns. But the messages kept coming, and none of them asked how I slept or where I would live. They asked what I could do, how fast I could do it, and whether I could do it before lunch. Each request landed like a small weight on my chest, not heavy enough to crush me alone, but relentless together. I opened my laptop because that was what I did when things felt out of control. I made order. I created structure. I started a file with a neutral name, something practical: dates, requests, time spent, money transferred, outcomes. I told myself it was for clarity, not judgment. I needed to see the shape of the problem. But as the rows filled, clarity became something else. It became proof. The pattern was unmistakable. My labor stabilized their chaos. My silence protected their image. My competence made their recklessness survivable. And the moment my own life caught fire, they stepped around me to keep their world intact. I leaned back in the motel chair and closed my eyes. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic. In that stillness, the truth finally settled, clean and sharp. I wasn't the daughter they cherished. I was the function they relied on. And functions, when they stop working, are replaced. I opened my eyes and looked at the file again. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. I didn't create the spreadsheet to accuse anyone. At least, that's what I told myself. I needed something solid, something that didn't flicker or lie the way memory does when you're exhausted and hurt. Numbers don't flinch. Dates don't reinterpret themselves. So I opened Excel and titled the file Family Ledger, expecting clarity and nothing more. What I didn't expect was recognition. At first, the entries felt harmless. A column for the date, another for the request, another for time spent. I started with the recent messages, then worked backward, pulling bank statements, emails, old text threads I hadn't opened in years. The rows multiplied faster than I thought possible. 2 hours fixing an insurance claim, 4 hours rewriting a contract, a weekend untangling tax filings. Small favors, I had called them, scattered across years. When I totaled the hours, my stomach tightened. When I translated them into money, the number stared back at me like a stranger I suddenly recognized. I kept going because stopping felt dishonest. The ledger didn't just show effort, it showed erasure. Each problem I solved was followed by a story where someone else became the hero. My father boasting about outsmarting an auditor after I corrected his filings. My mother praising her intuition after I flagged a clause that could have voided her sponsorship. My sister celebrating a flawless event after I quietly filled the gaps in her budget. My brother surviving another close call because I stepped in before consequences arrived. The pattern was so clean, it felt rehearsed. My work disappeared the moment it succeeded. Then I noticed something else, something colder. A permit. An unfamiliar file name buried in a shared folder. I opened it without thinking, expecting nothing more than clutter. Instead, my name sat at the bottom of the page, signed in a hand that mimicked mine but missed the rhythm. My chest tightened as I scrolled. Construction approval, electrical work, liability assigned. I hadn't seen the property. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't signed a word. I called my father immediately, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. He laughed, soft and dismissive, as if I had caught him misplacing his keys. "Relax," he said. "It's just paperwork. You worry too much. Nothing's going to happen." Nothing, I realized, was exactly the problem. Nothing had happened yet, so he felt entitled to my risk. The ledger expanded. I followed the thread where it led. Bank accounts I recognized but hadn't checked in years. Deposits that didn't match contracts. Transfers that made no sense until they did. Money passing through accounts tied to my name, my credit, my record. I remembered conversations I had brushed off, assurances I had accepted, because questioning them felt disloyal. Loyalty, I saw now, had become leverage. My sister's contracts listed me as a guarantor. I hadn't noticed because I had trusted her to be honest. My brother's purchases traced back to my address, a convenient shield against scrutiny. Each discovery landed quietly, without drama, which somehow made it worse. This wasn't chaos. It was design. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the realization settle without fighting it. If something went wrong, if an audit triggered, or a deal collapsed, or a regulator looked too closely, it wouldn't be their lives on the line. It would be mine. My name. My future. I wasn't the safety net they praised in public. I was the fall guy they assumed would absorb the impact. The thought didn't make me angry right away. It made me still. I added a new column to the spreadsheet and labeled it responsibility. In that column, I wrote the truth without softening it. Forged signature, undisclosed funds, misrepresentation, credit exposure. Seeing the words aligned felt like standing in front of a mirror that didn't flatter or forgive. The ledger wasn't cruel, it was precise. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet, listening to my own breathing. For years, I had mistaken endurance for love and usefulness for belonging. I had believed that holding everything together made me essential, that being essential meant I was valued. The ledger told a different story. It showed me a role I had accepted without consent, and a cost I had been paying alone. When I opened the laptop again, my hands were steady. I didn't delete anything. I didn't send messages. I saved the file and backed it up, not as a threat, but as a record. For the first time, I wasn't trying to fix the system. I was finally seeing it. And in that moment, the truth became unavoidable. I wasn't protecting my family. I was protecting myself from the idea that they never would. I didn't confront them. I didn't raise my voice or demand explanations. I didn't send screenshots or threaten exposure. None of that would have changed the structure that had taken years to build. I approached it the only way I knew how, the way I handled risk and failure at work, by preparing an exit that didn't require permission. I gathered everything quietly: copies of documents, email threads, bank statements, access logs. I saved them in places that weren't emotional, weren't dramatic, just secure. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge still keeps you tethered. This was about removal. If I stopped being the invisible support beam, the building would have to stand on its own. I moved apartments without telling anyone. I chose a place that felt deliberately small, almost temporary, with a lease that didn't invite visitors, and locks that clicked into place with a final sound. I changed my passwords first, one by one, careful not to trigger alarms. Then I changed the recovery emails, then the phone numbers. Each step felt strangely calm, like closing accounts at the end of a long project. I wasn't erasing them. I was handing responsibility back where it belonged. The messages slowed at first, then sharpened. My mother called, her voice light, almost playful. "I think something's wrong with my account," she said, as if technology had simply misbehaved. "Can you take a look later?" I told her I was busy and meant it. My sister followed with urgency, masked as charm, asking if I could just review something quickly because a client was waiting. My brother sent a string of questions that assumed immediate answers. I read them all and replied with less than they expected, or not at all. The silence that followed was not immediate relief. It was tension, a pause before something snapped. I watched from a distance as small cracks appeared. Deadlines were missed. Explanations grew defensive. The tone of their messages shifted from confident to irritated to confused. They were used to the machine working in the background, and now the machine had stepped away. I didn't step in to correct the course. I let gravity do what it does. A year passed without ceremony. On a quiet evening, scrolling without intention, I saw the post. A carefully curated photo of my family standing together in neutral colors, smiling as if nothing had ever been wrong. The caption spoke about healing, about releasing toxic energy, about finally finding peace. It thanked the universe for clarity and growth. There was no mention of loss, no mention of fire, no mention of the daughter who had slept in a motel while they posed for brunch photos. I read it twice, then again, feeling something tighten in my chest that wasn't anger. It was recognition. In their version of the story, I had become the problem they overcame, the negativity they outgrew, the weight they set down to rise. They didn't say my name, but they didn't have to. I was the absence that made their narrative cleaner. They rewrote history not to heal, but to absolve themselves. I closed the app and sat with the quiet. For a long time, I had believed that silence meant weakness, that stepping back meant surrender. Watching them celebrate my erasure reframed that belief. They weren't healed. They were unprotected. The ledger was still on my laptop. I opened it, not to add anything new, but to review what was already there. Hours, money, risk, exposure. I added a final note for myself, not for them. Withdrawal complete. No further intervention. It felt less like a victory and more like a boundary finally respected. I didn't need to correct their story. I didn't need to comment or clarify. The truth didn't require my defense anymore. It existed in the absence of my labor, in the delays they couldn't explain away, in the consequences that would arrive without my warning. They believed I was the toxic element they removed to survive. They never considered that I had been the structure keeping the worst outcomes from happening. Letting go wasn't punishment, it was honesty. I shut the laptop and turned off the light. For the first time in a long while, the future felt quiet. Not because everything was fixed, but because it was finally mine. I looked at the post one last time and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no urge to explain myself or correct the story they were telling the world. The absence of emotion surprised me at first. Then it settled into something steadier. What they believed about me no longer had the power to shape my reality. I opened my laptop and returned to the family ledger, not because I needed proof anymore, but because I wanted closure on my own terms. I added a final layer to the spreadsheet, something I hadn't done before. Market value? I pulled current rates for forensic accounting, contract review, crisis management, financial consulting. I multiplied hours by numbers that reflected the real cost of the work I had quietly provided for years. The total crept upward line by line until it hovered just below 6 figures. I leaned back and let that number exist without softening it. That was the toxic energy they celebrated releasing. Not negativity, not drama. A fully functioning support system they never paid for and never acknowledged. They hadn't healed. They had downsized. I closed the laptop gently. There was no dramatic send-off, no final message typed and deleted. I didn't need a last word because I had already removed myself from the sentence. Silence, I realized, isn't empty when it's intentional. It's complete. Their world had always looked solid from the outside, but I had seen the wiring, the patched beams, the corners cut to keep the lights on. It wasn't built on strength. It was built on borrowed stability. Paper walls hold as long as no one breathes too hard. All I had done was stop holding my breath for them. In the weeks that followed, I focused on small things that were mine alone. Mornings without urgency, evenings without emergency calls, decisions made without anticipating how they would ripple outward. There was relief in that simplicity, But there was also grief for the version of myself who believed endurance was the same as love. I let that grief pass without rushing it. Healing doesn't need witnesses. Sometimes I wondered when they would notice the difference, not emotionally, but structurally. When the missed deadline would carry a consequence they couldn't talk their way out of. When the paperwork would pile up without someone quietly organizing it overnight. When a mistake would finally land where it belonged. I didn't wait for those moments, and I didn't fear them either. Consequences are not cruelty, they are clarity. The truth is, I didn't burn anything down. I didn't expose secrets or pull strings behind the scenes. I didn't need to. Their world was already fragile. It just needed the illusion of support to disappear. Letting go wasn't an act of destruction, it was an act of honesty. Walking away didn't make me heartless, it made me free. If you've listened to this story from beginning to end, I want to know what you felt. Did it resonate with you? Did it make you uncomfortable? Or did it feel familiar? Tell me in the comments whether you like this story and what themes you'd like me to explore next. Stories about family boundaries, quiet strength, hidden labor, or something else entirely. And if you want to hear more stories from women who found their voice by stepping back instead of fighting louder, please like this video and subscribe. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and maybe one of them will feel like it was written for you.